High performers often set the tone for results and culture. But what are they not telling you? Scott Barlow returns to explore what high performers are thinking and how you may want to address it. This is Coaching for Leaders, episode 466.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Greetings to you from Orange County, California. This is Coaching for Leaders, and I'm your host, Dave Stachowiak. Leaders aren't born, they're made. And this weekly show helps you discover leadership wisdom through insightful conversations. You've certainly heard that employees don't leave organizations, they leave managers. Yet, perhaps, you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about the opposite of that. I know I hadn't until I talked more with today's guest on what happens when people hang on, perhaps too long, because they have a great manager. I'm so glad to welcome back to today's show Scott Anthony Barlow. Scott is the founder of Happen to Your Career. He's been featured on CNBC, Yahoo, CareerBuilder, Fast Company, and the Huffington Post, and many colleges and universities as a top expert on career happiness. He's held executive roles in human resources, business development, and career coaching. Scott is the host of the Happen to Your Career podcast, featuring the career stories of many successful professionals. His team and him have worked with over 25,000 people to help them stop settling, find their signature strengths, and start doing meaningful work that they're enamored with. Scott, I'm so glad to have you back on the show.
I am so glad to be back. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And one of the things you and I have talked about is this situation of people leaving managers. And yet, sometimes we don't talk about the other version of that, as I mentioned in the intro. When you think about this, tell me what's coming up for you.
Well, I find that particularly with high performers, it's not just about leaving. We see that actually many high performers stay too long. And we're in kind of this really interesting, unique situation. And when I say we, I'm talking about my company and I. We have conversations every single day with some of the most talented and highest performing people around the world. And they're often, at the time when they're coming to us, they have made that decision that they're interested in leaving, or at least interested in exploring something else. And very often they are in the place where this is the beginning stages of them thinking about this. And they share with us some of the things that sometimes they don't even tell their spouses.
Yeah.
So it creates this really unique, interesting place to get inside the heads of some top talent around the world.
That's exactly why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because for a couple of reasons. One is you're talking to often high performers, because those are the folks who are thinking really proactively about their career. Those are the kinds of folks who are hiring people like you to do a really good job at really maximizing everything they're doing in their careers. And those are also the kind of people that a lot of the folks in our listening community are managing. And I'm sure there are people who are in our listening audience who are the people who, maybe people are leaving because they're not the best boss or manager. But I actually think that's a small minority. I think more people in our listening community are good bosses. They're listening to a show like this. They're doing a lot of reading. They're really mindful about being good leaders. And people are staying with them who maybe are staying with them longer than they might otherwise do because of their strengths as a manager. And as I think back on my own career and think about not only the financial security and all the work to find another position and really liking mostly the people I've worked with throughout my career, thankfully, like one of those doesn't necessarily stop you, but like those three things together, if you've got those and you've got a pretty good boss, it's kind of hard to justify. I mean, just logically, even making a jump and a move. And so someone stays longer and they stay and they stay, and then the disconnect becomes even stronger. And all of a sudden the performance starts to fall off, as you mentioned. And you've identified three key themes of what you hear from people who reach out to you. What is it you hear?
Well, I'll share with you some of what they're actually saying. First of all, okay, so imagine the situation that you've just laid out. And that's, by the way, one of the reasons that they might not come and talk to you about this as well. Imagine for a second, that even though there's a variety of things that you think you might be missing, you're in the place where you have to go talk to your boss about it, and maybe you already have a good relationship. That's going to be a hard conversation. Hey, I don't really know what it else is that I want to do, but I know that this isn't right. That makes for a really difficult conversation that very few people are willing to have in one way or another.
Yeah.
Which means that you're going to have to take ownership over it, which is even more important why you'll want to understand some of these themes. So the first theme is that work is not as meaningful as it once felt, or it's not meaningful for what they want now in their life. So here's an example for how that happens. A lot of people will come to us, 10, 15, 20 years into their career. And that's the point where we get to talk to them. But what led up to this is they've gone through and they've accomplished many of their goals. They've gone through and they've checked the boxes. They maybe have been promoted a couple of times. Maybe they've changed organizations. They've accomplished some of what they want to. And now, at this point, after they've checked off all of these boxes for their goals, they're looking up and realizing, wow, I want something different than what I wanted, 10 years ago. I want something different. And I want it to feel much more meaningful. Now, here's the crazy thing when you think about it. If we're talking primarily about high-performing people, these are people that often can get a job anywhere. They are often very marketable from a resume standpoint and otherwise. But they're now starting to realize for them, it's not just about the job, and it's not just about the paycheck, and it's not just about having cool perks and everything like that. They're starting to realize, hey, I have all of these different pieces that are really marketable, and I have a lot of experience. I'm 10, 15, 20 years into my career, but I'm not feeling this connection to my work in the way that I want to, even though I'm get paid well, even though I love the people, and that's what's held them there up until this point. So we've heard this story again and again with organizations that are some of the great places to work, like Genentech or Google or any number of other places. We've seen them all, where somebody may have been promoted several times. They have had a good career track record on paper, but now they are not attached to the work. So Google example, we've seen the story a lot of the time. People say the same thing. They're like, I just don't feel that passionate, but I just don't feel like it's that meaningful, increasing the number of clicks. So for every single human being, the way that we are wired as human beings is we need to directly see and connect how the work that we're doing is helping others. So that's something we all innately need as human beings. That's hardwired into us. A lot of times that comes across, and when people show up on our digital doorstep and we're having this type of conversation with them, they're at the point where it's like, well, I need to be helping others. And they'll say things like that. Well, I just want to help more people. It's not that they're not helping people at Google, because, for example, we use lots of Google products all the time. And ultimately, Google allows us to get a ton of work done. And I would argue that every single role in the entire world is helping other human beings in one way or another. There's probably very few that aren't. Yeah. But that doesn't necessarily mean that each and every one of those people directly sees and connects how they're helping other people, which is, as we said, an innate need. On the organizational impact side, I look at an organization that we actually worked with really recently, and I think that they're becoming a really good role model for this. Philips, long time ago, they used to make electronics and TVs and all kinds of other stuff like that. Now they've shifted pretty drastically to a healthcare type organization. And part of the reason I'm throwing them out there as an example is they've realized that for work to have a chance at being more meaningful, they need to show the people who are doing coding and development for some of their healthcare technology, they need to show them what's actually happening on the backside with doctors and how doctors are able to save lives because this is easier for them to use and make rapid diagnosis. And they have an entire actually multiple departments to where they help bring those stories inward to make work more meaningful. So that's one side of it. But the other side of it is us each individually taking control over that. And the reality is most of us don't know how to do that. So most of us might know, especially these top performers that we're talking about that end up leaving, they might know that clicks aren't that meaningful to them at Google, but they might not know what is meaningful. So I would advocate that it's your role as a leader to help guide them and have some of these conversations about what makes it more meaningful.
I'm guessing that there are times, obviously, you work with people and they exit the organization, they go find another role or opportunity. And I'm also guessing there are times that they go back to their employer and they have a conversation.
Exactly. And I got to tell you that when I started my company, Happened to Your Career, 7+ years ago, whatever it's been now, I didn't think that this would be true. And today we actually see that around 15 to 20%, someplace in there, I don't know the exact number at this point, but someplace between 15 and 20% of the people that we help end up staying with the same organization.
When people actually do approach a leader in the organization and have a conversation like this, what works from the boss's perspective, the manager's perspective?
Those are almost always the leaders that say, tell me more initially, and really seek to understand what they want, but also those that go the extra step. And I would encourage anybody who wants to create even more loyalty and get people in the right place, right seat on the bus, and retain top performers, top talent for the right reasons, to go the extra step of saying, tell me what's behind this. Tell me about why you're interested in making this type of change. Tell me about what's causing this for you. And if you want to be on the proactive side, you can actually have these conversations on a regular basis, even if it's not a part of your organization's quarterly review process necessarily. You can make it an additional part to be able to say, hey, you know what? Every time that we sit down for a conversation like this, I want to know a few different things. I want to know what you're doing that you are absolutely loving, what you're finding a lot of meaning and purpose and enjoyment out of, or the right types of challenges. And then also, what are the areas that you're not finding that, or that if you could wave your magic wand and remove that out of your role, then what are those pieces? Because they're there. A lot of us are just ignoring them or assuming that our boss is not going to listen to them, and it's just something that cannot be changed or impacted or anything else along those lines. So your top talent is not telling you about them, but ignoring those doesn't do you or them any good.
So the distinction here that I'm really hearing is, and perhaps even making the assumption, especially with high performers, that there's stuff that's going to change. Even if something is really meaningful today, 6 months from now, it may not be anymore. And I'm growing, I'm changing. And to just assume that there's going to be stuff there that's not working. And rather than waiting 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it is, until someone is hiring a career coach or really their performance starts dropping off, that I'm asking regularly. I'm assuming there's stuff that's not working, and we're talking about what's going well, but we're also talking about what's not working. And that becomes a regular part of conversations with high performers versus waiting until you're in reactive mode.
Exactly. And this is especially true with what HR and talent management professionals and some other areas organizations might call high performance, high potential people too. Those people need more challenges at a more rapid rate. And if the challenge is missing, that can be linked to meaning. However, that doesn't necessarily solve the entire problem. So the only way to be proactive about this is to make it a continuous, open conversation. And here's the benefit out of it. When you do that part well, eventually those same people will learn that it's actually okay to come and ask for things that they think might be crazy, or it's actually become okay to come and have a conversation that might not seem logical at first, even though it's something that they're feeling, and even though it's something that is actually impacting their work.
Yeah. I mean, you make it a safe place to explore that. And I always think it's interesting, like we all know that we all have complicated motivations and meaning behind our careers and our lives. And somehow like a lot that doesn't make it into a lot of career conversations, and at least between employer and employee. I mean, that's all there. And I think that leaders often don't ask because they sort of have the thought of like, I don't want to know. Like I'd sort of rather like just assume everything's fine because I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that if someone says, I want to go start my own business in a year, or I want to change roles, or I'm not happy with this. And yet the people who are willing to lean into that a bit, I've come to a place where I actually want to know that. I want to find that out because then I can start thinking about like, okay, what would the next step look like? Yeah, if you're going to leave, what does that look like? I'd rather know that a year in advance than, find that out 2 weeks before someone departs, right?
Oh, yeah.
But also that gives me then the chance as a leader to start thinking about like, hey, you're going to be making this next move in your career anyway. How can we support you, and how can we line up some of the roles and the responsibilities that actually help you to get to that move, whether it's internal or maybe sometimes it's external, but that you keep that person engaged and it's meaningful for them and for your organization because you're lining up with the things that really do create meaning for them.
That is a hard pill for some leaders to swallow. However, that is something that what you touched on, I would much rather know, which means that I have to have conversations that most people don't have. Yeah. Which means that I have to be willing to support people in ways that most people are not supported, even if that means, moving to another organization. Like you don't get people coming to you having this level of trust if they believe they're only going to be supported under certain conditions.
Huge. So this is one of the key things you hear all the time. Work isn't meaningful anymore. One of the other ones you've told me is feedback and autonomy are missing. And you hear that again and again from people. What is it you hear around that?
Yeah, and specifically it's flexibility and autonomy.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
Feedback and autonomy. And yes, feedback is actually really critical as far as, we have this training that we do all the time where it's, what are the 6 keys to career happiness? And one of those absolutely is feedback. You need to understand if you're winning. That's critical. We need it as human beings.
Exactly. That's a whole nother episode, another day.
It's a whole nother episode, another day. In this case, some of the biggest reasons why people are leaving are really about flexibility and autonomy. And when I'm talking about autonomy, I'm specifically talking about the how. So flexibility is the win in some way, and autonomy is the how. So autonomy, for the sake of our conversation, you can think about it as I get to use my creativeness, I'm making up a word here, to be able to decide how the work gets done, which is crazy too, because if you think about it, so many leaders I've talked to are like, I have to make all the decisions and everything. But we as human beings, especially top performers, are those that want to decide the how work gets done. Now, here's a crazy thing about this. This is so hardwired into us as human beings that when we don't get to decide the how work gets done, that can lead to all kinds of stress, particularly distress, not the good kind of stress, not eustress, but distress that causes huge health impacts to the point where I've actually seen 2 different studies that have loose links to heart disease, which is crazy, like how big of an impact. And when so many people are trying to clamor down our door because they think they want remote work, what we find in reality is that really what they're missing is they're missing this ability to decide how the work gets done and when the work gets done. These people want more flexibility and autonomy and are questioning if they're at the right place because they're missing it.
Oh, this is fascinating because I'm having the conversations on the other side with folks in our academy who are oftentimes coming to us with the thing you just said, which is like, gosh, I'm into the weeds on all this stuff and I don't need to be in the weeds and all this stuff. And I know I shouldn't be. And yet people don't know what to do. And I find that often the mistake that's being made on the leadership management side is that it's too much of the how to do the work and not enough of defining the outcomes of the work.
Yes.
And that's really the work of management, right? Which is like, let's define what the outcomes look like is around quality, around budget, around timelines. And that work is often intended, but not actually done well. And so then it becomes so much about like people are in the weeds of the how stuff gets done instead of really doing the work of defining the work.
Yes, absolutely. It's so ironic that people want the same thing, but we struggle to be able to come together on both the leader and the direct report type side, where the how to actually do that feels really, really difficult. Here's two things that I've learned, just quick tidbits over the years for how to make that much, much easier. First of all, as you said, it's like the George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. Somebody said it along the lines of, if I have 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'm going to spend 4 hours sharpening my axe. That's the time where you are spending defining what the outcome is and making sure that you have the right people and the right resources aligned so that the work can get done. That's the 4 hours. And in this particular case, something that I found that helps expedite that, so there's less mistakes and less feeling like you have to go in and you like work can't get done well if you're not there in the weeds on every aspect of it, is doing I've heard it called like a pre-project document. There's a lot of different names for it. Most recently, I saw it called something like an intentions document, but this is a like one-pager document that your direct report might create just in 15 minutes with all the things that they think that they're going to do and how they're going to go about the work. They intentionally have a time limit on it so they don't spend many, many hours on it. And they bring it to you to get feedback before they get like 17 hours into it and bring it to their boss. And you're like, oh my goodness, deadline's 2 days away and this is crap. That's not a helpful place for anybody to be. So that type of intentions document solves a lot of that with relatively low time. Then you can give feedback on what their intentions are about the structure of a project, a task, whatever else it might be, and do more of that work up front. And saying, if you do this, it's not going to get the outcome that we laid out. And here's why.
Yeah, and I'm hearing you say there they create that to the point of the how. You as a manager, you set here's the scope of the work, here's the outcomes, here's what we're trying to define. You decide the how. You put together the how, and as long as it meets those objectives and it's within all the ethical and obviously the values-based things in the organization, like go for it, right? And that to me is something I hear like seems like all the time's often missed. You define the outcomes, but let the person who's doing the work actually figure out how they're going to do it, unless of course they don't know how and they've never done it before, and then of course obviously you're stepping in and doing more. But for someone who's a high performer and has a lot of experience doing this, being able to make that shift is huge to get to that flexibility and autonomy that then you're hearing about 2 years later when you're running into someone that they don't have because their manager hasn't really done that well.
Well, and they say things like, on the flexibility side, they say, well, I feel like I don't have a lot of flexibility for my family. But on the, like what we're talking about, hits more on the autonomy side, which is more along the lines of, I just feel like I have this creative side of me that I want to use, and I'm not really able to use it. So I feel like I almost have to be a different person at work.
The final one you hear as a constant theme is that people have outgrown the role. And when you hear that, what are the kinds of things people are telling you?
When we're talking about outgrowing the role, they're saying things like, I don't really feel challenged anymore. I feel bored. Like work used to just go by like crazy. I'd look up and it's the end of the day, and I had a lot of fun during the day and also had a lot of challenges during the day. And now, like I find I'm watching the clock. They don't feel like they're learning anymore in the same way that they need. Now, the reality is all of us need variety in some capacity, but the type of variety and the type of learning and stimulation and the type of challenges look different. So this is a lot like the meaningful side There's there's the what we all need as human beings, and then there's the what we need uniquely. So a lot of the same pieces that we talked about too on the work is meaningful side apply here too. What are some of the, if we're back in the interview process, way back before we even make a hire for a top performer, what are some of the ways that you found that you have been challenged in ways that are good for you in the past? What do you feel like are some of the challenges you are really interested in taking on? And then these types of questions carry over into on an ongoing basis, ongoing conversation with them. And certainly, you can even start this tomorrow to prevent some of this, turnover of loss for some of the wrong reasons by going and asking about, what are the ways that you'd like to be challenged going forward? And if they don't know, asking enough questions to help them decide for themselves too.
The 15 to 20% of people that you work with that actually stay within the organization and maybe do change the role, what do you see that managers do or don't do that is helpful to think about how they'd reframe a role or maybe adapt to a different role or even create a role where there isn't one?
I think some of the most helpful things are that, first of all, the manager is open to looking at it in a different way. The leader is open to considering other ways that the organization might benefit. Another thing that we see time and again, this is actually another bonus for leaders as well. Good leaders in this case are actually turning it back to the employee, and they're making them do the work, which if we're helping them, and unfortunately we don't get to help everybody. A lot of these people just end up leaving, but when we're helping them, we're saying, hey, you need to own this the whole entire way. And some of the great leaders that they then go have the conversations to are echoing that too, saying, hey, you know what? I am totally willing to consider this. Here's what I think that you need to do. You need to own this through the entire process. This is the advice that they're giving to their subordinate, their direct report. And part of what I'm going to want to see is not just how this is going to benefit you, but how this is going to benefit the entire organization. And I really think that we'll need to understand, why it might make sense to, shift some of your resources in terms of time, or for us to create a new role, or whatever the situation might be. But they're putting the work back on them to do it.
Yeah, so they're really encouraging that person to own it, to put together the plan, and make the business case, I'm hearing you say too, for what that looks like, and having them take the first step.
Yeah. And not only is that better for the leader, but think about how much sweeter it is for the person if it works out. They've done all the work and now they have earned it. Like, this feels 150 times better versus if it were just given to them and you did the work for them.
Right. And it is interesting that even among high performers, I do find that I run into the situation where people assume that it's the organization's job to drive their career. And really, the people who I find have the most success in their careers, they do have the expectation that the organization and others around them will support them, but that they own it first and foremost, that they are going to take the lead on their career. And it sounds like you're seeing that same thing when managers then encourage that and put that ownership there too while supporting them, that's a good combination.
Yes. Short answer is yes. The longer answer is that I think this is going to be one of the biggest shifts in how each of us looks at our career over the course of the next 15 years. I think if we look ahead and we look more and more that there's more and more opportunities out there, increasing by the minute, and things like flexibility and autonomy are more and more desirable, and we're beginning to understand just how linked they are with satisfaction and happiness and all kinds of other things that are very, very good for your employees to have, then this is going to become more and more critical that we as individuals are owning our career trajectory, are taking responsibility for our own career development, but also that organizations, leaders in organizations are becoming more and more responsive to creating individual roles around the people that they want to retain.
This is great. I mean, so much of this, I think every one of us, as we lead teams and think about the work that we're doing, especially in supporting high performers, which are the people that almost always are making even larger contributions to the health and the success of the organizations. If we can zero in on really the work being meaningful, flexibility and autonomy, and then being willing to have conversations, if not change, but at least have conversations about what roles look like, how those roles adapt over time, encouraging people to take that ownership and to make the business case for it. And if we're doing those three things, sounds like we're doing a lot better than the average manager out there.
I think if we're doing those three things, as near as I can tell, you're doing better than 98% of the other folks out there, based on what I'm seeing.
All right, so a couple invitations for folks. One is definitely track down the episode notes. We'll have it in the weekly leadership guide. Scott's show is called Happen to Your Career. So if you find yourself in this place where you're thinking about what's next for me, I love what you do on the show, which is you interview people about their career journeys and talk about especially some of the cool inflection points they've had along the way and what they've discovered from that. So it's a wonderful resource. You also have a free course that a whole bunch of folks in our community have used in the past, Scott, and folks in our academy have used. It's an 8-day course, right?
Yeah, it is an 8-day course. And it is literally 8 emails designed to give you an exercise every single day to help clarify what makes an ideal career for you right now and beyond. And actually, along the theme of this conversation, we recently, this is something I didn't expect to have happen if you would ask me, 8 years ago. We've had a lot of managers and leaders that have shared it with their teams to help people clarify in advance with the intent to become more proactive. Huh. So, and think about that. That's super cool as a leader, because most of what our organization does is help people move roles, to have the level of trust and confidence in your subordinates, your direct reports, to guide them to a website that normally helps people steer away, but instead with the intent to actually help them learn about themselves, to come back and have a conversation and help them dredge up for themselves what creates much more meaningful work, so that you can continue to have these types of open conversations that we've really been discussing today. That is pretty cool.
Scott Anthony Barlow is the founder of Happen to Your Career. Scott, always a pleasure.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on.
3 related episodes that will support this conversation as well, especially if this was useful to you. I'd recommend episode 259, How to Figure Out Your Career, also with Scott Barlow. In that conversation, we talked about it from your perspective. If you're the person who's perhaps the high performer and looking for the next opportunity, or feeling like maybe it's not the next opportunity, but just today doesn't quite feel right in your role, episode 259 is a helpful place to start to begin to put the frame around what the next step may be. Scott and I talked about that in detail in that episode. Also recommended to you is episode 370, 3 Steps to Great Career Conversations with Russ Laraway. Many of us have heard the advice of having good career conversations with our employees, and Scott really reinforced that today too, of leaning in proactively to have some of those conversations before the transition happens, before someone gets frustrated and is already on to the next opportunity. In episode 370, we talked about the how to do it, specifically a 3-step framework over 3 conversations that will help you to begin to navigate how to have good career conversations. That is something that almost none of us have been trained on how to do, and Russ Laraway has a beautiful model for really exploring that in depth. Episode 370 is that. And then finally, I'd recommend episode 413, Effective Delegation of Authority with Hassan Osman. Scott mentioned in this conversation the importance of defining the work, but not micromanaging the work. And this is a topic that comes up again and again and again with so many folks in our listening community. It is the focus of many of our academy conversations of how do I ensure that I am framing work well and making sure we get good results and having good accountability, but not being a micromanager. Again, something that many of us have not been formally trained on how to do. And episode 413, Hassan Osman teaches us the framework for doing that well and how to delegate authority. All of those episodes you can find on the coachingforleaders.com website, and I would encourage you to set up your free membership. When you do, you'll be able to search the entire episode library since 2011 by topic. Career growth is one of the key areas inside our episode library, but so many other areas there as well. And in addition to that, you'll also find resources on the book notes for authors that I interview on the show and other experts who've done research in many of these areas. You'll find the member casts. You'll find several free audio courses that go into depth on vision, on leadership skills, on coaching. There's a ton in there that will be useful to you if you've not dived in to the website before, plus access to my weekly leadership guide that comes out every Wednesday with other resources, suggestions of other podcast episodes to listen to, and of course, many of the things in current media that I'm finding online that'll support you. Next week, I'm glad to welcome Lois Frankel back to the show. She is going to teach us how to say no without saying the word no. Stick around for that next week. Have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you next Monday. Take care.